Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be starting our coverage of the 2016 Tata Steel Tournament, one of the big tournaments of the year, starting the year out right in the Netherlands. 14 players, 9 of which are in the top 20 in the world, including our world champion, Magnus Carlsen. 2016 is a big year for tournaments. We have the candidates tournaments in 2 months, and that's going to decide who actually plays Magnus Carlsen for the world championship. And so I'm going to be interested to see some of the players in that tournament, how they fare. And we're going to look at one of those today. Fabiano Caruana, 23-year-old Italian-American Grandmaster. He's going to be facing off in the candidates tournament in a couple months, so he's going to get the party started today. He's playing the white pieces. His opponent today is the 13th ranked player in the world, Grandmaster from Ukraine, Pavel Eljanov. He is a very strong player, 32 years old, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Fabiano starts out with knight to f3, pawn here to d5, pawn up here to c4, pawn to e6, pawn here to d4. This is a kind of a different variation, getting to the queen's gambit. After knight f3 or knight f6, knight c3, we see pawn taking here on c4. It's not super common nowadays for black to take. Most of the games I cover and watch, black is usually playing in the decline lines, so kind of refreshing to see the queen's gambit go into an actual accepted line. Now after pawn to e4, we see the bishop come down here to b4, and Fabiano has a few options here. His main option is to play bishop here to g5. He says, hey, if you're going to pin down my knight, I'm going to go ahead and pin down your knight as well. This kind of protects from the knight coming here to e4. It's a huge pain for the knight to come here to e4. Double attacks this knight here on c3. Gonna go up upon a material. You just don't want to have to deal with it too much. Another option is queen here to c2. That both protects the knight here on c3 and also protects the pawn here on e4. Fabiano says, I'm not going to do either of those, and he plays a bishop taking here on c4, and now the knight comes down here on e4, castle on the king side. And this is interesting because Fabiano is essentially saying, I'm going to give you that pawn. I'm not even looking to get that material back right away. I just feel like I'm so much better, essentially, that I can play the advantage of developing my pieces towards the center of the board, and that is an enough advantage for me to go ahead and go on to win this game. So pretty cool, I think, to come out the gates as the white pieces, to go that strong. It is very risky, I think, but that's kind of the direction that he is going with. Now black comes back with knight to f6. I really like just continuing to take pieces, especially since you're up in material. You're playing such a strong player in Caruana. I would just go ahead and take here after the pawn takes. Bishop takes here on c3, attacking the rook. Rook here to b1. Castle on the king side. This is going to be completely fine for black. But as we step back, he decides to go ahead and play a little bit safer. Play knight back here to f6. Now the bishop's going to come here to g5, pinning down this knight to the queen. Castle on the king side, queen up here to e2. Just continuing to develop his pieces. Already finished his development. So if we look at kind of both sides of the board, black is up material by 1 pawn, but white has all of his pieces developed. Both of his knights controlling the center of the board. Both of his bishops very, very active, controlling the light and the dark squares, pinning down this knight. The rooks are connected. The queen's controlling the central file, the e file. And black on the other side, he hasn't moved his queen, bishop, knight, or rook over here on the queen side. So he definitely is going to be looking to kind of play somewhat defensive. White really needs to continue to be aggressive. If you're down material, you have to bet on the fact that, okay, I have more active pieces, I have better development, I can use that to my advantage to maybe gain material back, get a checkmate, something like that. Black just needs to hold on, make sure white can't do any of that. And so we see pawn here to h6, bishop back here to h4, bishop back here to e7. Black doesn't want to be too aggressive. He knows that if he can play good defense, he's definitely going to be in this game, middle going into the late game. Rook over here to a d1, just solidifying kind of the central pawn here, since it doesn't have any pawns connected to it. Needs to make sure that it has major minor pieces behind it, protecting it so we can start to push forward on board. Knight here to d7, knight up here to e5, knight over here to b6, bishop back here to d3, and this is, if you kind of look at it and say, well, the queen could come here to d4, this is one of those moves that the Grandmaster's not going to fall for, but every now and then you'll see someone at a lower level actually fall for this. They feel like you've kind of made a mistake, but if the queen were to come here to d4, all of a sudden bishop here to h7, check, and then the queen's going to fall. It is a discovered attack on the queen right here. We don't really see that being taken here from a Grandmaster as good as Pavel, but The knight's going to come here to d5, bishop back here to g3, bishop here to d7, knight up here to e4. So as we kind of look at it, black's doing a really good job. We don't see white taking advantage of the fact too much because there's no way for him to really do that. Black is just really solid on defense. So black has the advantage here. There's nothing he has to worry about as far as threats right away, and he is up in material. So Fabiano's got to find a way to kind of break through and use kind of his advantage that he has position-wise, or else he's going to go down in this game. Bishop down here to a4, attacking the rook. Rook over here to c1, controlling the semi-open file. That's fine as well. Knight back here to d7, pawn up here to b3. We're first going to see an exchange here on e5, and then the bishop is just going to come back here to c6. Nice little square just to control the center of the board for the light square bishop. Rook over here to d1, pawn up here to a5, pawn here to a4, and then queen here to e8. Just wants to make sure he's controlling, protecting the bishop here. Also wants to make sure he can swing his rook over here to d8, get involved into the action, and control the center of the board since this d file is completely open. Does not want to have his queen here. Instead wants to make sure he has his rook over here on d8. So pawn up here to h4. Fabiano decides he needs to start being pretty aggressive on board. Rook over here to d8, and now pawn up here to h5. Knight over here to b4. Nice little outpost. Also opens up the door for this rook to kind of control this long open file. We have bishop back here to b1, and this is kind of a sneaky move since you have the king castling over here on g8. You see the pawn open up here on h6. This light square bishop always poses a threat that black has to worry about, just coming here to h7 or potentially having a queen here on d3 or c2 swinging into action. So just another thing that black kind of has to worry about. But this does open up the door for the rooks to trade off if they want to. We are going to see the king come over here to h8. Just doesn't want to have to worry about the bishop ever coming here to h7. So that looks completely fine to me. Bishop up here to f4, opening up the door later on if the pawn were to come to g6, kind of stopping any sort of threat. Then this bishop can come over here, take here on h6. That's going to be very, very good for white. So just kind of slowly improving his position as Caruana. We have the rook over here to g8, protecting the king a little bit more. Bishop down here to d2, attacking the knight, and then the rook here to d5. I don't really like this move from black, the rook here to d5. We're going to see the bishop take and then the pawn recapture. You'd much rather take with your bishop here. So after the bishop takes, the bishop recaptures. This is a much better position for black. This bishop is much more active than if it's back here on e7. It has a nice little outpost. But the reason that he can't do that and he has to take with his pawn is because if the bishop were to come down and take here, then all of a sudden queen here to c2 is really, really brutal. There's no really great moves that black has to do. If, let's say, he were to take rook here on e5, that looks somewhat basic, just taking material on board. Then all of a sudden, knight to f6 is just deadly. It's attacking both the rook and the queen. But it also opens up the door for the queen to come here to h7, and that's checkmate. That's very, very bad. So you could see the bishop block here on e4, but then the knight's just going to take, and white's going to be up just too much material on board. If we come back and say, okay, instead of the rook taking, what if we just say queen to e7? That kind of stops that threat, but we could still see the rook take here on d5. After the pawn recaptures, the knight can come up here to f6. It's still very, very deadly after the pawn comes here, because after that knight, all of a sudden, h7, that's checkmate. So has to worry about that. Pawn here to g6. Now the knight can just come up here to g8, take that, and then after it takes, pawn takes here. This is just all sorts of trouble. The queen takes, pawn takes here on f7, and then just really difficult for black to have to deal with all these threats on board. So if we come back and say, okay, what else could we see here? Well, we could just see the rook take here on d1. We could see the rook take here on d1. Maybe take here on e4. That's fine. But then after the queen takes, still attacking the square here on h7. The pawn could take. The pawn recaptures. Now the queen's going to come up here to b7 and just go up too much in material. So that's why, unfortunately, black can't take this bishop here he was kind of forced to take with his pawn instead. But if we come back, instead of the rook coming down here, just would have been so much nicer if we were seeing queen here to f8. Not the easiest move to find. Doesn't really look like it's that active, but actually does a lot and allows black to really get his dark square bishop involved into the game. But we see the bishop come here. If the queen were to come here to f8, then we'll just see bishop here to c3. But on board, we see the rook here to d5, bishop here to b4 after the pawn captures. Now white decides to go ahead and take here, and then the pawn captures here. It would be a mistake if the bishop were to take here on d5. These small little things, Fabiano's putting black in so many tough situations to take back incorrectly. Then queen over here to c2 kind of does the same thing as we talked about before, putting so much pressure. This is just a crazy square that black has to deal with, the bishop here on b1. We could see now pawn here to g6, but then queen here to d2, attacking the pawn on h6. This is now a big threat as well. Pawn here to g5 if you wanted to, but now knight up here to f6. Attacking both the queen and the rook. If we see the bishop take, then the pawn recaptures. It's just very difficult to deal with. The queen can just come back here to d3, threatening the square right here. So it's just all sorts of bad. Nothing really good is going to come out of this. So we see the pawn capture here. Much better pawn to actually capture than the bishop. Knight back here to g3. Bishop here to g5, getting it involved. Wasn't doing too much back here on e7. Also opening up the door for the queen to protect this pawn here on e5. White really wants to start pushing this pawn up the board and just see if he can cause some havoc on the king side of black. Fabiano now plays rook over here to e1, adding another layer of protection to this pawn here on e5, also allowing himself to get the queen involved and not have to worry about protecting this pawn with his queen. Now pawn here to g6, queen up here to g4, attacking this pawn here on b4, queen over here to e7, protecting the pawn, and then the queen over here to d4. A nice little series of moves from Fabiano to kind of set this position up right here. Fabiano really wants to play pawn here to e6, pushing that pawn forward, has protection from his rook, but also a discovered attack that's very difficult for black to deal with. Black almost has to play queen here to e6. Unfortunately, he threw out the I have to do anything, and he played the pointless move of pawn here to b6. Fabiano quickly plays pawn here to e6, discovered attack. Black is kind of forced to block that, plays bishop here to f6. Queen here to f4, attacking the pawn here on h6. So we see pawn here to g5, kind of stopping that. But then queen up here to f5, getting ready to bring his queen here to h7. Black has to stop that. He plays rook here to g7, and then the queen back here to c2. And Fabiano has kind of orchestrated all of these queen moves, just getting himself in a better position, making black's position even worse, all from that very beginning where he brought his queen up here, brought his queen over here to d4, and black just was not prepared for it. Now the queen comes here to c5. Fabiano has a few options. He could just take here on f7, and this is probably okay after the rook takes. Then we could just see the queen come up here to g6. That's going to be fine as well. Fabiano decides to go ahead and exchange material off the board. That's fine as well. Now the knight can come up here attacking this rook here. The rook comes back after the pawn takes here on e7. We do see the game in. There's just no way for black to hold on this board state. This pawn is just too brutal to have to deal with. White just has too much of a better position. So Fabiano wins. I've heard in the past from videos say, you know, Kevin, how would this game possibly continue? Well, we could see the rook come here to f8. Now the rook swings up here to e6, attacking both bishops on board. You can start to see how this loses very, very quickly for black. Maybe he gobbles up one of the pawns here. The rook takes here. Rook coming back here if he wants to, because this knight can start to get involved into the game, taking over here on h6 if he wants to. But from here, can just take material on c5. Depending on where the rook is, he could take here on c7. He could take here on c5. He's just going to start gobbling up material. There's no way for black to do much of anything. He kind of has to stay at bay to protect his king, and white just has too much powerful material. So all in all, Fabiano Caruana takes the first match, so kind of catapults him into first place. We do have 2 weeks of chess to go, 14 players round-robin tournament, so he's going to have to play a lot of games, continue the success, but excited to see some of these players getting ready for the Kansas tournament to come out strong, especially first match in a big tournament, not to play passive, not to play for a draw, but actually to go for the win. I feel like that's what he did the entire time. Black on the other side, I felt like he played pretty well. Pavel made a few mistakes, I think, towards the end. Didn't really fully understand some of the big threats that Fabiano presented to him. And all in all, he got the loss there. But really excited about this tournament. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this game and look forward to kind of doing commentary over the next couple weeks. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.